Thank you for joining us today as we discuss how to make your 360 film VR project a success. Good afternoon, I am Shelley Andagan, COO of 3DPaint Effects. We specialize in stereoscopic finishing for both traditional and immersive media, or XR. My focus there is on streamlining projects and our pipeline through an active and structured process which takes initiative, ingenuity, and efficiency to the next level. While investor and reporting agencies focus on hardware, content, and adoption as separate entities, these are actually interrelated elements, all affected by unaddressed underlying issues in immersive media. Those issues are lack of standardization, and in that vein, a need for a simple, singular distribution. According to a presentation by Lean Seegers, co-founder and CEO of LucidWeb at the Expand the Web AR, VR, and Voice panel earlier this month, the top challenges to 360 film virtual reality are missing standards, fragmented distribution landscape, a slow or low market penetration hardware, and relatively expensive production costs. While LucidWeb provides solutions to the second and many others focus on the third, my belief is that the primary challenge, a lack of standardization, is the key differentiator between immersive media and its currently more successful counterparts, feature film and television. My personal goal is to spearhead a movement towards standardization in immersive, innovative technology and media. In doing so, we can galvanize our community to address the rest as a matter of course. What do I mean by standardization? Quite simply, there is a need for progress in our field. How do we get there? Planning, process, procedure, protocol, project specifications, platform, and standardization. We will cover each of these, but let us first compare traditional and emerging media. Here is a basic comparison of film, TV, and VR in history. In the 1830s, we had the first stills created. George Eastman's creation of series photography with rolls of celluloid in the 1880s was a groundbreaking moment. By the 1890s, we were in the early days of motion pictures. Silent film began in 1910, and sound on film became available in 1919. Now listen to this blurb from Britannica about sound in film. The public was widely interested in these films, but the major Hollywood producers were not. They viewed talking pictures as an expensive novelty with little potential return. Sound familiar? It was not until 1927 that we had a full transition to talkies. According to Britannica, the wholesale conversion to sound of all three sectors of the American film industry took place in less than 15 months between 1927 and 1929, and the profits of the major companies increased during that period by as much as 600%. Although the transition was fast, orderly, and profitable, it was also enormously expensive. The industrial system, as it had evolved for the previous 3 decades, needed to be completely overhauled. Studios and theaters had to be totally re-equipped, and creative personnel retrained or fired. Again, sounds familiar, doesn't it? You can see that further progress was made with CG, photogrammetry, and mocap. And so if we are generous and look at film from the 1930s until present day, that is roughly 90 years of trial, error, and evolution toward the established systems in place today. If we take a look at TV, According to Britannica, it was first regarded by many as radio with pictures. Public reaction to the arrival of TV was strikingly different from that afforded by the advent of radio. In 1948, programming transitioned from scarce to more regularly scheduled. Britannica describes this year, saying radio remained the #1 broadcast medium in terms of profits, audience size, and respectability. And that is the year that started the golden age of TV, believe it or not. We then had color TV and satellite introduced, so TV had about 60 years of growth, experimentation, and advancement. Compare to that the history of VR. While VR was conceptualized and its key technologies created between the 1830s and 1970s, paralleling advancements in film technology. There were contemporary concepts that were pioneered between the 1960s and 1990s. That's when HMDs, haptics, early movement within a virtual space, and computer processing all developed. Even so, the Virtual Reality Society noted that there were unfulfilled promises made by virtual reality in the 1990s. It wasn't until 2010 when the Oculus Rift was released, followed by the Subpack, or body haptics, and then in 2014, we had a big year with the release of HTC Vive, Google Cardboard, and Samsung Gear. Sensory masks, spatial audio, headphones, and scent projection systems followed shortly thereafter. We are now starting to see haptic gloves. So if you compare the technical and creative sides of traditional media versus immersive, you see that we have the history of TV and film, 60 to 90 years, if we're generous, compared to immersive media, where we are in the infancy of 20 years of development at best. For TV and film, we have a single video channel, or you multiply that by 2 if you have stereoscopic media. You are blocking within a rectangle. You have dual audio channels, and before the sound folks jump at me, that's for the consumer. They're basically listening to just left and right, unless they have surround sound. And we have known camera systems and fast-paced editing. Meanwhile, in immersive media, there are multiple video channels. They go from 4 or more for professional media, and you multiply that times 2 for stereoscopic. You have a much higher resolution, where the base was 2K only 2 years ago, and toward the end of 2016, the standard became 4K. Now there's talk about even higher resolutions. As a result, data needs are vast for working and distribution. Did you know that increasing your resolutions exponentially impacts your data load? In other words, changing from 4K to 8K is not an increase of a factor of 2. Rather, 6K is double the data required for 4K, and 8K is 4 times the data load of 4K. You're also blocking within a sphere. The last century has been about fitting everything into a rectangle. It's time for us to think outside the box. Jesse Kim of Prosper spoke on our AR/VR innovation panel at Digital Hollywood last week on how directors coming out of the flat screen business are at a disadvantage. In my opinion, it is directors with experience in the theatrical realm who have a better grasp on the immersive field, since they already play with that zine dimension. Further, Ms. Kim emphasized that her company focuses its sights on actors who are experienced in improvisation, as it lends a more natural and believable 360 experience. We also have spatial audio, or omnidirectional sound, and those can and should be used to drive a piece and give it further depth versus simply setting the tone. We also have rapidly evolving camera and rig systems and a natural rhythmic timing or editing differences between this and traditional media. According to Anita Balakrishnan in CNBC Tech, Content consumed through VR can capture our full focus with minimal behavior manipulation. Virtual reality is able to slow down its storytelling because it has a third dimension, space, which can be used to reveal new information in an engaging way. Now we can compare the logistics for TV, film, and immersive. You can see that in TV and film, we have an established step-by-step process. It's planned from the beginning to the end, but it emphasizes initial project stages rather than the entire pipeline. Likewise, turnover and delivery processes are set in advance. The schedules are formulaic because you generally know what to expect based on the overall project type and genre. Consideration of budgeting for all pieces of the puzzle are accounted for with pre-production through prints and advertising. Everyone knows their role for the most part, and standard specs for distribution are available across all providers. Meanwhile, in immersive media, we're still in an experimental and established phase. It's a free-for-all, and there's a reason why so many refer to this field as the Wild West. Planning must be more specific and intentional. Think Hitchcock meets theatrical performance. You want to include all stages and departments here. Yes, even post, IT, and technical teams need to be considered. Schedules are elongated. Technical needs are exceedingly higher due to the intricate nature of these media and the exponentially large data loads required. Time must be set aside for experimentation plus trial and error in each phase of the process. After all, every project has unique elements in this developing field. Budgeting is drastically different and exponentially higher. Logically, multiplying the camera footage and thus data load would increase both these as the needs are proportionate. This is where most projects get hit. Budgets rarely include appropriate funding for the areas with greatest financial needs, especially for finishing, data, and distribution or marketing. According to Robert Watts, who spoke at the Digital Hollywood panel last week titled Power of VR and AR, the budget for immersive media has a higher baseline, and then it goes exponentially up from there. So we also have roles that are blurred. You don't want as many people on set in an immersive set as you do in a traditional one, which means there are a lot of hyphenates. So roles need to be clearly defined. We must also recognize that distribution is fragmented due to the location and specifications being inconsistent and dependent on hardware. So we're narrowing this down to the effects on the public. As you all know, that in TV and film, it's more of a passive entertainment or information for the consumers, and it grants the director or filmmaker agency. Meanwhile, in immersive media, we have the consumer who has the agency, and they have the choice where to look when. So greater consumer engagement and impact means that we need to take a more in-depth look at this. We want to create a world where the consumer can forget themselves even for just a moment. So how do we create with this tool across emerging media and technology in a way that will yield positive results? We use the 6 P's of progress that lead us toward the S in standardization. So the first P is planning. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. You've all heard this since the 3rd grade. You must involve all the departments, as I said earlier, from the start. Pre-production and production are not even the half of it. Remember, post alone in immersive media can include editorial, stitching, visual effects and animation, conversion, color, and then you need to remember that audio is also pivotal in this medium. So that includes sound, sound effects, dialogue, composing, and mixing. Add to these the back-end pipeline, IT, technical engineering, encoding, distribution, and marketing needs, and you'll see that unlike traditional media, these are all closely interrelated. This is also a great time to talk about best standards and practices, which is my favorite subject. Familiarize yourself with these needs and limitations of each department. This can make the difference between a single shot costing you $20K or $200K. Poor planning and implementation mean you pay for it with money, quality, time, and possibly all three. For example, a few of the topics covered in the best standards and practices I developed with our team are camera choice, camera placement, and camera movement. Any one of these can make or break your project depending on the intended content. So the next step is process. That's the steps towards our goal. Develop a definitive plan of attack for the entire project. Define your key roles. This is a time, for instance, where employing previs and VR supervisor services can be extremely helpful. That's where you're going to start saving money. And those are services we offer, by the way. Procedure. This is the order of those steps. Work with departments to create a logically sound and realistic schedule that encompasses each step of your process. Leave room for trial and error. Set milestones when all parties are present. You don't want to leave anyone out because that might bite you in the butt in the end, and I've seen it happen over and over again. Then we have protocol. You want an official, established system. Ensure that every department knows their role for each step, including handoff or turnover to other departments and personnel. We as humans can be so focused on individual steps or phases that sometimes we get caught up and forget about the transition. How does your camera department track and communicate shot information for editorial? This is known in traditional media, but it's often forgotten in immersive. How does editorial sort through this information and pass it on to VFX, and so on? According to Sanjit Dang's article in TechCrunch, VR is not a tweak to an existing platform. It is a tectonic shift in how we interact with information and each other. Hollywood also needs to integrate VR into its existing production workflows. That means a full stack of protocols, techniques, and tools. And I would go so far as to say that we need to create a new system. That brings us to project specifications. Determine the precise file requirements that work across all platforms, hardware, and workstations. Discuss and set specs at the start so you do not hit a wall at the end of your project. Test files should be sent through the pipeline at the beginning to ensure viability. And lastly, platform. Localization of and uniformity across distributors is very much needed in our medium. While covering planning, I mentioned how intertwined departments and production choices are. In immersive media, because we have varying distribution options that all operate differently, your platform can determine your project specs. If this is not taken into consideration, consumers may not be able to load or even view your project properly. A similar issue occurred in the 50s in TV with the divergence of color coding specifications. That's what resulted in us now having NTSC and PAL or CCAM in Europe. So if you wing it and decide midway to change your distribution platform, for instance, guess what? All the teams that I just mentioned may have to entirely redo their work, essentially starting from scratch to accommodate that single change. Why? Color coding, encoding, distribution, all of those are very closely related in immersive media. Another factor affecting distribution is how widely varying and dispersed it is. According to Daniel Kenyon, who I believe is here today, CEO of Furious M at Digital Hollywood, last week, he said one of the inhibitors of adoption is that we spend 8 hours looking for something to watch in VR, but the battery life is 2.5 hours at best. So what do? That leads us to standardization. Ta-da! Standardization takes all of the P's and puts them into place for optimal operations. Speaking to the need for a systematic process. While on the VR, AR, MR think tank panel at Digital Hollywood last week, Yvette Vargas said, "We need standards in the industry. That's one of the things that's really missing at the moment. It's standards. What we cannot do is continue on this path of ignoring or leaving the latter departments or stages to chance. The more tight-knit and communicative you are with your crew in detailing each step of the project, the more you set yourself up for success." So rather than vacillating between analysis, creativity, or technology in immersive media, intertwining these leads us towards standardization, and through it, success. Thank you for your time. As a reminder, I'm Shelley Andagan. Please feel free to connect with me if any of this inspired or resonated with you.